Welcome back to Andersen Acres. It's a frigid day outside. We're talking 40 below. It's, well, almost 35 below. So much fun. The weather is not cooperating. So I thought we would cover a topic that I can stay inside and cover with just a few photo shots and just discussing the issue. So today we are going to dive into a topic that can really help your garden thrive. And it's a great way to make use of a valuable resource that you already have on your property, if you have ducks. Duck manure. Yep, today we're talking about making compost from your duck's poop. Yes, this video is about duck poop. Oh, I won't show a bunch of duck poop in the videos and the pictures, promise. But it's about using that duck poop instead of, I know some people like to put the duck poop in their feed bags and then throw the feed bags out. Don't do that. It's usable stuff. This is good stuff. I know it smells and it's awful stuff, but it's also really good stuff. So if you have ducks or you're thinking about getting yourself some ducks, this is for you. So let's get started. First off, let's talk about why duck manure is such a great addition to your compost pile. Duck manure is really high in nitrogen, which is essential for creating a real nitrogen-rich compost, and a heck of a lot of plants need the nitrogen. But because duck manure is more potent than chicken manure, it's important to compost it properly to prevent it from burning your plants or creating an imbalanced mix. That means it has to bake. You can't just scoop up duck poop, which is real watery anyway and hard to scoop up. It usually soaks into the bedding and you scoop the bedding. But you can't just scoop the duck poop and throw it on your plants. You'll kill your plants. Don't do that. You don't want to kill your plants. Don't do that. So duck manure itself contains a variety of beneficial microorganisms which can enrich your compost and in turn help your plants grow big and strong. It's a fantastic way to recycle waste and helps close the loop on your homestead, so you're having to buy less stuff. It allows you to use what you've already got to enrich and enhance your homesteading or hobby farming experience, which basically means you get to use what you got. You don't have to pay for fertilizer if you have animals like chickens and ducks and goats and horses and rabbits. You have fertilizer. Duck fertilizer, duck manure used as fertilizer, is awesome. Okay, very, very handy. So now that we know why the manure is awesome, let's talk about how to collect it, because like I mentioned, it's real liquidy, and it kind of hits the grass and disappears on you unless you happen to slip in it while it's wet. That's not fun. So, if you're going to use duck manure in your compost, you have to have a way to collect it. This will normally be through the bedding of your coop, okay? You'll want to put bedding in areas around their feeding areas where they sleep, all of those places, because they poop a lot, and they poop a lot where they sleep and where they eat. So put a lot of bedding that can be scooped and moved to a compost pile in those areas. If you like to use straw or wood shavings in your duck's bedding, you're already well on your way to creating a nutrient-rich compost because the shavings or the straw kind of balances out the nitrogen in the duck poop. These things mix really well with the manure and help it compost faster. So if you have that kind of bedding, even paper bedding is really good. That's what we use. We use paper. I like to scoop the bedding once a week. But how often you clean your pen depends on how many ducks you have, the size of your pen, your time. So some people like to do their pen every single day. Not everybody wants to change their bedding that often. I like to do once a week at least. So sometimes I'll do twice a week in the summer when things are hot and smelly. In the winter, it's once a week because what's the point? Everything's frozen. If you use a deep litter method, you can just keep adding bedding to the compost pile and it'll compost in place, and then you can just move it to your compost pile in the spring. So I will eventually do a video on deep litter, but basically it's just putting in the bedding. When that bedding is soiled, you put another layer of bedding. That bedding gets soiled, you put another layer of bedding, and then when it warms up in the spring, you just clean it all out. Some people like it because it composts in place and can generate its own heat. I don't love it because we live where it's so cold, it just freezes solid and doesn't compost anyway. So I might as well save myself the effort. Now, the actual composting process. Duck manure is really high in nitrogen, but compost needs a good balance of nitrogen and carbon. So it's high in nitrogen, doesn't have a lot of carbon, and it needs that carbon to break down properly to bake down and become a nutrient-rich soil that you can use to grow your plants. So you'll want to add some carbon-rich materials like dried leaves, straw, or shredded paper. Remember, if you're using bedding that is one of those things, then you're already well on your way, right? Because you just put that bedding that is soiled into your compost pile, and you just stir it up now and then, and it should bake down into a really nice, deep, rich soil. Layering is the key though. Start with a layer of carbon material, so that could be leaves, that could be paper. Then you want to do a layer of duck manure or bedding that is soiled, right? That's soiled. So you want something clean at the bottom like leaves, and then the duck manure, and then something clean like shredded paper, then duck manure, then something clean like shavings, so that you can balance the nutrients. If you're using one of those bedding materials, you might not have to do the layering. You might just be able to put it all in the compost pile and mix it up. Basically what you want is basically a ratio of 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, which means you'll need to balance your duck manure with the carbon materials. So if already your bedding already has that 3-to-1 ratio, then you're fine. You might want to add a little bit of dried leaves to your compost pile just to kind of enhance the carbon and balance out that nitrogen. Turning your compost every couple weeks will help speed up the process. You don't have to turn it, but if you mix your compost pile, it does speed up the process. It aerates the pile, and this is important for healthy decomposition. If you're using a compost bin or a pile, just use a pitchfork or shovel to mix it up. If you're using a tumbler, tumble it a couple times a week. Compost needs to break the right moisture level to break down, so you don't want it super dry. You also don't want it sopping wet. You want it damp, not soaking wet. If it's too dry, it will take a really long time to decompose. If it's too wet, it'll start to stink. Instead of smelling like dirt, it'll smell like duck poop. And duck poop stinks. So you definitely want it composting at the right rate. A good rule of thumb is to make sure the compost kind of feels like a kitchen sponge that you squeezed out. So damp, but not dripping. You want to make sure that pile stays warm between 120 Fahrenheit to basically 160 Fahrenheit, which is roughly 50 degrees Celsius to 70 degrees Celsius. If it cools off, you can add more manure and turn it to get things heated back up. If you live in a northern area like I do, like we're sitting at 35 below right now, we were 40 below yesterday. We're warming up, yay! But if you live in an area like I do where it's that cold, you may simply have to wait till spring. So you just keep putting the stuff in your compost pile. Don't stop doing that. But it may just simply not start to compost until things warm up a little bit. So our compost pile, even though it's large because we have a horse and goats and everything, is currently pretty frozen. Okay? It's pretty frozen throughout. It doesn't matter how much manure we add to it. It's not going to warm up. It's literally too cold here for that. So what you want to do then is keep using your compost pile. Keep piling the stuff on. That's a good thing. But know that it might stay frozen until spring. That's okay. It'll just start decomposing eventually. It'll catch up. So we have about 6 to 8 months out of the year where our compost will compost, and the rest of the time it's frozen. So I don't worry about it because over the summer it will bake down. That's why in the spring we start using a different pile that next year we'll use. So we're going to transition from the pile we're using to the different pile as soon as things melt. That's the way we do it. Depending on your climate, you may compost a little differently than we do. After a few months of being warm, your compost will break down into dark, crumbly soil that smells earthy and fresh. This is your finished compost. When it smells like dirt, then it's ready. Okay? You can use it to enrich garden beds, feed your plants. You can use it as mulch around fruit trees or vegetable plants. You can put it in your planters, whatever you have. This is excellent stuff. If you don't have any use for it, after it's composted and baked down, bag it in old feed bags and sell it. Okay, you can get a few dollars per bag. And depending on how many ducks or chickens or whatever you have, that could be quite a few bags. So it's not garbage, even if you don't garden. It's still good stuff. Even if you, once it's baked down into dirt, you spread it nicely on your lawn, it'll help your grass. So everyone has a way to use it. You can either sell it or use it yourself. So don't let this stuff go to waste. It's really good stuff. Adding compost to your garden improves soil structure, retains moisture, and provides valuable nutrients for your plants, making it a perfect natural fertilizer. So this is valuable stuff. It is technically organic. It's poop. It's organic. So now let's talk about a few things that you might run into while you're composting your duck manure. If your compost starts to smell really bad, so there's a couple of problems that can happen with compost, and one of them is it stinks. It smells like duck poop. It usually means it's too wet or it's not getting enough oxygen. Try adding some more carbon materials, so some more shredded paper, some more leaves, some more whatever you have, wood chips, whatever you have, it doesn't matter. But you want to add the carbon material and you want to turn it more frequently. Okay, so if you've been turning only every couple weeks, step that up and turn a little more often. If you don't have the space for a compost pile, some people don't. Most of us do, but some people legitimately do not have the space. If you don't, consider a compost tumbler. It's an easy way to compost manure, and it composts it fairly quickly because it's constantly moving, or it can be constantly moving if that's what you do. But get a compost tumbler, and it can compost your materials without taking up a lot of room. I still prefer a pile, okay, but a tumbler works if you have smaller spaces. So there you have it. A simple guide to turning your duck manure into rich, nutrient-packed compost. Sorry. I'm just listening outside the door here, outside the window. I can hear a goat. So I'm just wondering what she's up to, because this side of the house, there's nothing over here except apparently the goat. Oh, she's okay. She's just being weird. But I can hear a goat through the window. That's what's behind me is a window, and I can hear her. Anyway, so your duck manure makes a compost that is a great way to recycle waste and to keep your garden healthy. Well, that's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. If you have any tips or questions about composting your duck manure, drop them in the comments below. The more we learn from each other, the more we all know. We'll see you tomorrow.